Are you a business looking for a fresh new way to reach potential customers? Well, you need to get airtime on IT TV, a 24/7 streaming and on-demand TV service online and on Roku. With Roku having a potential reach of 62 million people, it's a perfect opportunity to reach potential customers through affordable commercial and infomercial spots. Visit us online today at itnetwork.tv.
Good morning. Good morning. Happy Tuesday. Thank you for joining me on another episode of the Roundtable Talk Show. I am your host, Sharifah Hardie, and we have some incredible guests for you today. We have a returning guest. We have some old friends. We are going to shock you today with the information that we share. But before I go ahead and introduce today's guest, I'm going to ask you to do what I always ask you to do, and that is to go ahead and share this show. There's someone in your network who needs this information. Maybe they're in your house, a spouse, a child, a coworker, a boss. I don't know, a cousin. Maybe your cousin needs this information. Maybe they just started their new business. They're an entrepreneur. They're a business owner. Or maybe they're just simply someone who's looking for inspiration. And this is where you find it on the Roundtable Talk Show. So go ahead and send that text, make that post, send that tweet, but let someone know. Send an email, but let them know that the Roundtable Talk Show is live. Because as I always say, friends don't let friends miss out on the Roundtable Talk Show. So while you're introducing the show to your friends, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our first guest. And he started off with a question. Do you know anyone that's worked with Sir Elton John or Elon Musk? Anyone who sent people down to see the wreck of the Titanic on the seabed, or closed museums in Florence for a private dinner party, and then had Andrea Bocelli serenade them while they eat their pasta? You do now. Quoted as the real-life Wizard of Oz by Forbes and Entrepreneur magazine, Steve Sims is a best-selling author with Blue Fishing, The Art of Making Things Happen. Andre Bocelli. Yes, Steve Sims. I get to meet you. Good morning, Mr. Sims. How are you?
Good morning. I'm good, thank you. It's early, but I'm good.
Steve, it is 8 o'clock in the morning. What time do you normally wake up?
I have to admit, if you can't dictate your own life, then you're doing something wrong. So I usually get up about 8:30, roll out, cup of coffee, sit on my patio, look over the hill. I don't get into work mode until like 9 or 10 o'clock. But hey, it's you, so I made the effort.
Hey, now you can add that to your list of all the things that you've done. You got up early in the morning for the Roundtable Talk Show with Sharifah Hardie. So, Steve, for those who don't know you, tell us a little bit about yourself. Who are you? What do you do? And what are you passionate about?
Wow. Well, you basically explained it. I grew up as a bricklayer in East London, poor, and it kind of stank. So I went out to try and find rich people to find out why they were rich and I weren't. In doing so, I went from being a party promoter in Hong Kong to throwing my own events at Monaco, starred all the rich places around the planet because, hey, that's where rich people hang out. Ended up launching the world's leading experiential concierge firm called Bluefish. And then 5 years ago, thinking this was just what everyone did, I was asked by someone at Simon & Schuster to write a book. And so I wrote the book Bluefishing, just quite simply going, look, this is what I did with the Pope. This is how I got to meet Elon Musk. This is how I got, a museum to shut down in Florence and have Andrea Bocelli come in. And this is how I did it because that's obviously how you lot did. Suddenly discovered that no one did. So now I train, I coach, and I speak all over the planet, getting people to go, quite simply, to go for stupid. Not for impossible, but for go for stupid. Get out of their own way, stop overthinking, start overdoing, and that's what I do.
Okay, we're going to have to learn more because I need to know the how as well. But we are going to come back to you, Mr. Sims. I want to go ahead and introduce our next guest. You have seen him on the Roundtable Talk Show before. Definitely a pleasure. He is a brand strategist for the modern entrepreneur and the practical business coach, Mr. Sean Atkinson, a Majority Media. Good morning, Sean. How are you?
Good morning. I'm doing well. Excited to be on this panel. There's some really interesting people here. I would say I put a focus on helping businesses gain brand clarity and identify and engage with their target audience so that they can compete in their market. So I do that through my 5-4-3 method, and it's something that allows you to be able to not just identify your why, but the client's why. And when you compare the two and you combine those, you can actually really build out some brand loyalty and be able to work with clients. So I'm excited to be here and be able to share some of the insights that I've picked up over the years.
Did you get up early in the morning to talk to me, Sean?
I did. I'm not a morning person, so I'm happy to be here, but it's going to take me a little bit to warm up. But we've got a great crowd, so I think it's going to be something that'll be really interesting, and I'll probably close strong.
Oh, I like that. Strong close. That's how you do it. I'm going to come back to you, Sean. I want to go ahead and introduce our next guest, Mr. David Eady. David is a certified executive advisor, CEA, who has worked in the financial planning industry in Montreal for more than 35 years. He is the author of the bestseller Executor Help: How to Settle an Estate, Pick an Executor, and Avoid Family Fights. Good morning, David. How are you?
Good morning, Sharifah. How are you?
I'm excited. Everybody's getting up early in the morning to talk to me. People are closing down museums. People are teaching brand strategy. I just love to learn. And I definitely want to learn how to avoid family fights.
Well, that's the reason. Well, first off, I just got up because it's a good time for me. It's almost 11 o'clock, after 11 o'clock. And I wrote the book because it took me 7 years, 10 court appearances, and $50,000 to settle my parents' estate. Excuse me. And they had a will. And anytime I would talk about everything I was going through, I'd hear about one story from an executor where they're having problems, or I'd hear about another family that had broken up. So I didn't want anybody else to go through what I went through. So I decided to write the book. And I know it's not a sexy topic to talk about, but spoiler alert, we're all going to die. And what we're going to be talking about is, how to leave a legacy and not a legacy in a mess.
Now, David, now I feel like now it's time for me to go back to bed. You just ruined the end of the movie. That's okay, David. You can still stay at the Roundtable Talk Show, but I'm going to move on, David.
And I'm doing it from Canada, so it's all good. So you're international today.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, they don't die in Canada, right?
Let's ask David. Do they die in Canada as well?
Sorry, absolutely. We're just as bad as the Americans. 60% of most Americans don't have a will or an estate plan. So we're just as bad as you. Yes.
Okay. I don't know if that's a compliment or an insult, but we're going to come back to David. I want to go ahead and introduce our next guest, Miss Krista. She's a writer, PR professional, and story consultant. Krista Janek asks the deeper questions that uncover your untold stories. She gets experts and businesses noticed through the written word, from blog posts to bios, ebooks to e-courses. Her own personal story also inspires audiences. Good morning, Krista. How are you?
Good morning. I'm doing well. Thanks. I actually did not have to get up too early to do this. It's 11 o'clock here in New York. And so I'm excited to be here.
So basically, you just killing time, and you was like, I guess I'll go talk to Sharifah.
Well, I had some computer glitches this morning that weren't any fun, but they got fixed just in time to be here. And so obviously computers are important to a writer. I really enjoy helping others to share their knowledge and to help tell their stories. It's very ironic also that I've been helping others share their stories and their information for years, and yet I haven't always shared my own story about being a blind person and learning how to ski, becoming a business owner, a networker, and facing all those fears and challenges.
Wow. I wouldn't ski at all. I'm afraid to ski. I'm afraid I'd run into a tree. So I applaud you. That is miraculous. What gives you the courage to do that?
So my motto is, because this is how it happened for me. If you think something's impossible, go ahead and find someone who's already done it. You just might find someone. That's what happened to me. I never thought in a million years that I would ski, even though I had dreamed about it. yet one day my martial arts sensei told me about this wonderful program for the blind up in Vermont. I was like, no way. Do they really ski? I had to call them. I had to find out. I had to do my research. I asked a million questions. Ultimately, it's just like anything else. You take the small steps. Sometimes they become giant leaps forward, and you see what happens. And if it doesn't work out, as something like skiing, if it didn't work out, it wouldn't have been a terribly big deal. Oh, well, I had some fun in the snow today. Or, oh, well, this was the worst day of my life, but at least I tried it. And whereas because I took that chance, I loved it.
Wow. I just love how you worked in your martial arts sensei into that conversation. But that was smooth, Krista. I like that. I'm gonna come back to you because I see how you roll now. I see you making all these power moves. I'm gonna come back to you, Krista. I want to go ahead and introduce our next guest. And she is also an amazing guest, Miss Emily Williams. She's a coach for women of color at work, DEI, and organizational development strategist. Good morning, Emily. How are you?
I'm doing well, Sharifah. Thanks. Good morning. Yes. So I'm Emily Williams, a coach and advocate for women of color. I address the issues that are most toxic for women of color at work, right? So we're talking microaggressions, micromanaging bosses, being set up to fail, harassment, discrimination, all of these things, right? And at the bottom of it, I support women of color to get promoted, to get paid, and get recognized for their brilliance, right? Because what we're seeing so often is that that's not happening.
I'm sorry, we're having trouble hearing you.
How about now?
Yes,
The
that's
women of
much
color.
better.
We got it.
Great, thanks. So women of color come to me when they want to get promoted, paid, recognized for their brilliance, right? And on the other side of the coin, we can't only rely on women of color to make the change in our workplaces, right? We know that there's a huge problem with the culture of work in the U.S. right now. That's why more than 4.4 million people left their jobs in November alone, right? So I also work with organizations to build workplace cultures where women of color and people of color can actually thrive. So,
Wow. I am definitely impressed. We love hearing what you had to say, Emily. We are going to come back to you. I just want to go ahead and introduce our next guest, Mr. Bill Bloom. Bill Bloom is a husband and father, family first. He is a sailboat racer, classic car driver, author, podcaster, multiple business owner, strategic coach, 10 times member, and a lifetime learner. Bill has created the Retire As You Desire lifestyle that helps you earn back your freedom so that you can live a purposeful and passion-filled life. Good morning, Bill. Thank you for joining us.
Oh my goodness, good morning. This is such a treat. I mean, to be able to see Steve Sims this bright and early and so chipper. Oh my God, it was such a nice surprise to see him this morning, and thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Bill. Who are you? What do you do? And what are you passionate about?
All right, so family always comes first for me. My wife and I have a 2.5-year-old and another one on the way in about 2 months. So family
Congratulations.
always comes first. So excited. Thank you. And I love sailboat racing. I love driving cars. I've got an old classic car that I love to just take out, relax, and take my wife out on a date. But, I grew up in a household where my parents could never figure out money. Ever, ever, ever. It was always a problem. And they never really had it. They didn't know how to make a dollar work for them. So that really became my lifelong passion, is to figure out how to allow people to buy back their freedom, because who doesn't want that? And our time is our best asset. So if you could have your money working for you, figure out what it costs to actually free you up from a time perspective. It's a beautiful thing. So that's my big passion.
Okay, so I'm nosy. Everybody knows that's why I host the Roundtable Talk Show, just so I can ask nosy questions. What do you have behind you?
Okay. So a company called A Gaping Void, they created these tiles for me. So these are really great reminders for me. So every time I go into my office, I had them create the Retire As You Desire logo, and that's the logo for my podcast. And the other ones say money create options, gratitude changes things. Write it down, watch it happen. I just love these sayings because they put you in the right state of mind in the morning. And Steve, I don't know if you're going to like this one, but the one right behind my head says, you make or break your day before 8 a.m. So I don't know.
Steve.
Oh, I'm a failure. I apologize, Bill. I'll try to live up to it.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So Bill, why didn't you and Steve are friends? Why didn't you give Steve any plaques for his wall?
I don't know. We got to make that happen. He's in the garage, I think, with this
I
awesome
am.
setup with the bikes.
I am. This is actually my garage with an old piece of corrugation thing, and I'm literally surrounded by a bunch of motorcycles.
No, it just reminds me of that example. Is like one friend has like 10 plaques on his wall, and then the other friend has no plaques on his wall. So I'm like, you know what I mean? Let's share. Let's give a little bit.
Are we really friends? Which is what you're asking. That's the question. I can understand. I'm now questioning that as well.
I've never broke up a friendship on the Roundtable Talk Show. This is like a new one, even for me. So you guys be nice, play nice. We're gonna go talk to David. David, I want to hear your story. I'm gonna find out more, but how did you go through all of this if your parents had a will?
Can you repeat that again? Sorry.
If your parents had a will, a written will,
Yes.
how did you go through the struggles that you went through?
Well, we are 3 siblings, and despite everything be split 3 ways, and that's the problem with a lot of wills, even though actually where the problem starts is my parents didn't have the conversation with us. Even though they had a will, they didn't have the conversation to let everybody know what their wishes were. So there wouldn't be any surprises. So 2 of us knew there was a will, and we assumed, the transfer, everything would be split 3 ways. But the 3rd sibling, they didn't agree, and they blocked everything. They went to court, and that's how we ended up in court 10 times. And they tried to get my father, who was 90 years old at the time, dying of cancer and had dementia, and tried to get them to change the will in their favor. So if my parents, the only mistake they did is they didn't didn't have that conversation. And that's what I talk about in the book. One of the areas is to have that conversation with the family to let everybody know what your wishes are. They may not like it. That's too bad, because it is your assets that you're dividing up. But at least there's not going to be no surprises.
That's interesting. So, Bill, when you retire and you live this amazing life, do you advise people to take their will and their wishes into account?
I mean, you need to understand where you want your money to go. That's having the correct beneficiaries on your accounts. If you want to donate money to charity, do you set up a foundation? There's a lot of moving parts that go into this. I mean, my mom passed away about a year ago, a little bit more than that. So I understand going through this. It's a nightmare. It's not easy, and understanding that process is so important. I've dealt with people on the financial side of things, but doing it for my own mother, it's not fun. It's really not fun. So the more steps you take to be proactive, the better.
Mm-hmm. I can definitely imagine. Now, I want to go over to you, Krista. Krista, how do you become so fearless? Krista, you're on mute.
It's not that I'm fearless. It's more that I feel the fear and do it anyway. It's a question of going out there and trying new things. And it's interesting because a lot of times my clients, in somewhat of the same way, are afraid to share their stories. Very often when I meet them, they kind of clam up a little bit about the mistakes they've made in their past or the lessons that they've learned. Yet a lot of times for a business owner, that's part of how they build credibility. Aside from showing everyone how much they know, when they can share the story about why they know it, how they learned it, sometimes the hard way, it often adds strength to what they're saying.
Incredible. Now, Steve.
Actually, I want to add something. I want to add something on that. I was at a party in London and I won't name drop, but they were very important people. And there was a very famous guy from America, businessman, that I was in the lift with, or the elevator, should I say. And as we came out into the party, he literally breathed a sigh of relief and he went, "Excellent. I'm in a room full of serial failures."
Oh, wow.
And I thought to myself, that's kind of a bit, derogatory to the people that were in the room. And he obviously sensed that I'd kind of like, changed my mood a little bit. And he turned around and he said, "No, you don't understand. Everybody in here has failed, but it's refined them, not defined them." And then he went on with the party. And that always stuck with me. And then a follow-up to that, Joe Polish, who also has a lot of the Gaping Void artwork there, he turned around to me and he said, "The definition of hell is to meet the man or woman that you could have been." And that those two elements there have always allowed me to realize that if you fail, it's because you tried. And failure creates education creates experience, credibility, and that's where you grow from.
Well, and I want to add on to that, because what Krista said originally was that, her clients are oftentimes afraid to share their stories. And I don't think we should dismiss that, especially when, thinking from the perspective of women of color in the workplace, when we talk about our stories, when we come, forward truly as who we are in the workplace, there oftentimes are consequences for that. We can be punished for that. Right?
No doubt.
There's also a conversation to be had about different identities, different life experiences, different statuses, right? And then how that allows people the privilege to fail, right? Many people aren't afforded that privilege, right? I hear that all the time from my clients, that they cannot show up as women of color at work and be forthcoming about the mistakes that they make, right? Because it's not just considered, "Oh, great, yeah, you failed, let's learn from that. Everyone, let's take a learning lesson." It's then taken to mean, okay, you're not good at what you do. You actually don't deserve to be here, right? So when we talk about failure, yeah, of course, we all fail, right? Nobody on this planet is perfect, but some of us are given more leeway, and it can even be glamorized if some of us fail. But if others of us fail, there's punishment, right? There are harsh consequences. So that's important to keep in mind in this conversation as well.
I would add to that your failure is your authenticity. It's what separates you, what makes you stand out. It's less about the failure and it's more about what you take from it. And when it comes to being able to share your story, I think that's one of the things, especially for businesses that are just starting out. When you start to ask about their brand journey, they think that everything needs to be perfect. And the reality is, people are going to purchase and be interested in you behind your character more so than what some of the other things that may come into play. So I think it's one of those things where you have to be able to fail. You have to be able to have those experiences so that you can find ways to be able to get better. If you've never tried anything, then how do you grow from that? They said that you can't really grow in isolation. It requires having that interaction. It requires failing. It requires learning from those situations so that you can get better at it. If you've never practiced it, if you've never overcome anything, how can you relay that to someone else? And in some cases, there are businesses that start their business and they started because I overcame this and I want to make sure that other people don't have to deal with it.
Absolutely. David, you started your business based on your struggles. What are your comments or thoughts about serial failures?
Well, I am still a financial advisor for 35 years. But how I came about because of the book is that it took me into another realm of being an author. I've done books, 20 years ago, but it was like a perfect storm. One morning when we're going to on our many trips to the courthouse, I turned my sister and I kept saying to her, "This is a book." And she goes, "Well, why don't you write it?" And I kept going, no. And that's like 7-8 years ago. And then fast forward, the pandemic hit. And, here in Canada, snow started to come down, and I'm not a skier. I tried it, Krista, not for me. I tried it twice, not for me. And I said, well, I might as well write a book. And so that's how I ended up with now going into the realm of being an author and now in the areas of book marketing. But I think we all, I mean, even all of us sitting right here, being on this show here with Sharifah, is that we're doing some things that other entrepreneurs wouldn't do, and we're not afraid to speak our mind and share our ideas. Where I know of a lot of people who just have problems making sales calls or talking to other business owners because they see sales as something that, you know, that's something that isn't very very good to do. So, you know, maybe we're not going to come across, we're not afraid of not coming across looking well on the show, but clearly having Steve, you know, get out of bed so early in the morning to do this, and you know, we find out that Krista clearly could kick all of our asses if she had to. So we're in a great situation, and we're not afraid of the failure, even if Krista was going to beat us.
Oh, that's okay. Maybe you need to be in stand-up comedy, David. I'm gonna give you a whole new genre, new industry to go into.
I have been told that, and I just look at things differently. But yeah, okay. Thank you. It's very kind of you to say.
You are so welcome. Bill, your thoughts, serial failures.
I don't even think failure should be considered, because you're either going to figure something out or you're going to learn. There's been so many times when I've made mistakes. I haven't done things the way that I would have loved to execute on them. And I don't care about that anymore. I think that definitely holds people back. And that's what makes people scared. And my mentor and friend, Dan Sullivan from Strategic Coach, you know, he said it in the Gap in the Gain book. He talked about, you are always going to be learning or you're going to be reaching your goals. There's no other option. And when you make mistakes, just learn from that. I know it sounds so simple. We're all kind of saying that. But if you really take the time to make yourself vulnerable, that's where you're going to see the biggest gains in your life. I mean, look what Steve's done. To have those huge events, be around billionaires, that would make most people cringe. But make yourself exceptional. That's your only responsibility in life, is make yourself exceptional and make life better for others. And forget about failing. Just go out there and make things happen.
I think that's an excellent point, Bill. But usually what I found, and especially, you know, I launched my first podcast talk show in 2009. I've been doing this for a long time. And usually what I found is when people get that wisdom or that revelation, it's some defining moment. Was it a defining moment for you where you were like, you know what, I don't care if I lost that business, or I don't care if I lost that job, or, you know, maybe it was just watching your child being born and you was like, you know, nothing else matters. But was there a defining moment for you?
There was. I mean, there were multiple. When I started my company, I was 27 going on 28. I had no business experience. My parents didn't help me. They didn't know anything about this. And I just figured it out. My first year in business, I netted $24,000 of income. 24,000. Being 28 on 29, it was not easy living in Chicago, in the city. I mean, it was an interesting year, but I learned a lot. I learned that you don't actually need a whole ton of money. It gives you conveniences. It helps. And don't get me wrong, more money is going to help you rather than less. But I just figured things out, and that's what life should be all about.
It's just figuring them out. Emily, you're so passionate about what you do. Was there a defining moment for you where you saw something happen to someone else, or you had an experience where you're like, I have to do something?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, this idea of sort of like making yourself exceptional, you know, or just, you know, taking chances, right? Doing what we believe in, making a difference for other people. Well, I was doing that in my last job. And it turned out that the more that I shined in my role, the more success that I had, the more of a target I became, right? And, you know, as someone who, you know, really believes in justice, really does believe in that we can make the world a better place for everyone on the planet, right? And, you know, I had the opportunity to do that in my last role. I was working with women around the world to pass a global treaty against gender-based violence and harassment in the world of work at the United Nations, right? So I was doing trainings, I was encouraging women to speak up about the violence that they're experiencing on the job, to advocate for policy and changes in practices and organizational culture. And then when I got back to my office, I realized I was experiencing the very same thing. And so I had a moment where I thought, okay, So I've just been traveling all around the world, encouraging women to speak up. I have to do the same thing, right? I have to practice exactly what I preach. And so when it became very clear that what I was experiencing at work was actually targeting, that it was harassment, right? That it was bullying, that it was a toxic culture, I said, nope, I'm going to speak up about this. And, not only am I going to make things better for myself, create protection for myself in the situation, I'm also going to make it better for others, right? Other people of color, other women of color. And I'm going to call for structural change, right? So that's exactly what I did. And, I had success with that, right? Relative success, right? There was actual change in the organization. I was able to, take care of myself in important ways despite a toxic working environment. And I came out of that with the conviction that I want women of color to know that they have more options than to simply suffer through a toxic working environment, right? Which is very harmful to our health, our physical health, our psychological well-being, right? Or to just leave and just quit, right? Because not everybody has that option, right? Or not everybody has that option in the moment when they need it most, right? So that's exactly why I do what I do. That's why I coach women of color to navigate toxic working environments. And that's why I work with organizations. Listen, so many people are saying our culture of work is not working. It's not healthy, right? So it's organizations listen, right? And many of them are making, good faith efforts to improve their company culture, right?
I believe that they are. We're definitely making strides. I want to hear Krista's thoughts on what you had to say, Emily. Krista, you're on. Okay.
I think I applaud you for telling your story, because you are sharing that you came from a toxic work environment. And I understand what you're saying about that it is a vulnerable place to tell your story. That's why I hadn't told my own for quite a few years. I don't always tell the stories of when people think less of me for having a disability, or when people discriminate, or any of that sort of thing. There are a lot of stories that maybe we don't always tell in every situation. And so I think what it boils down to is that for me anyway, oh, I don't know what that was about. That was strange. Anyway, I'm sorry. I guess the computer gremlins are getting in the way today. Okay. As long as you can hear me. What I'm trying to say is, what I try to help clients do is to share their stories from a strengths-based perspective, because we all have areas where we've sort of come out the other side. And then if we're sharing about a weakness or a vulnerability, it's often because we want to advocate. We want to change something. We want to make things better. When I'm talking about how I have trouble on certain websites or with certain applications, I'm doing it as a weakness. Oh, I have a challenge. I can't accomplish this task. I can't do this, that, and the other thing. But it's for a purpose. It's to advocate. It's to speak up for change, to make the web more inclusive, more universally accessible.
Yes, you're making a change in the world, Krista.
Can I ask Emily a question? Is it okay?
Sure.
Emily, is it? Have you seen what you've gone through, and also with your clients, that the tension of workplace environment for women of color has changed since the pandemic? All of our lives have been turned upside down. Have you seen? It's been going one way for a long time, but because of all of how we do business and how our workplaces have changed, do you see that it's been ramped up, or there's been a little bit more tolerance?
Yeah, David, that's a great question. Well, to start, women of color were incredibly impacted by the pandemic, right? One thing that's really important is that women of color are often supporting their families and others, right? So the economic impact, so women of color were more impacted by the economic impact, right? In addition to caretaking roles. So, many women of color have a full-time job, but then also are caring for family members, right? So that increases their overall labor, right? Their overall workload. In addition to needing more flexibility, right? With childcare, family care, community care. On top of that, David, many women of color were in positions that were on the very front lines of the pandemic. First responders, people working in service industries, home health care. So, they were not covered by all of the protections that were passed in the stimulus package. And at the same time, they were still expected to be working full time while, their families maybe were at home or their family needs changed. So, that's one angle of it, right? Is that the pandemic increased the workload, increased the stress, right? And even still, we didn't have all the workplace policies and practices in place to accommodate those needs. On the other end of the spectrum, for women of color who were able to work from home during the pandemic, we saw that there was a real reckoning of, their experiences in the office, right? The majority of women of color do not want to go back to the office. And they don't want to go back to the office because of things like microaggressions, right? Because of the harassment, right? The toxic workplace cultures, right? So, by and large, here's another statistic for you, David. So, in 2020 in the US, we saw all of these sort of new commitments or renewed commitments to diversity, equity, and inclusion that came out from companies, nonprofits, organizations, writ large, right? At the same time, despite those commitments and those statements, right, all these new DEI like director positions, microaggressions for women of color at work has not changed since 2019, right? Since before those statements were issued. So all of that to say that no, the pandemic did not improve employers' responses to women of color. Rather, women of color were greatly impacted by the pandemic, right? And we still have not seen the changes or the shifts in workplace culture to accommodate those impacts.
Bill, I'd love to hear your thoughts. I heard the wow and the surprise in your voice. What were your thoughts on David's question and what Emily had to say?
I think like we have a very diverse household. My wife is from Argentina, and I understand that there's always moving parts. So I have empathy for that, a lot of empathy. And we've had a lot of D&I training through a nonprofit organization that I'm part of. So it needs to be addressed. Everyone should have opportunities to be lifted up. And whether that's they take the initiative and read a book instead of buying a couple of Starbucks, or save money and take a course and do this or do that to lift themselves up. But we need to be part of a bigger group to help others and bring them up as well. So that's what my thoughts are on that.
Thank you. Steve, you've been quiet over there.
I've been listening to the conversation, and that word has come up a lot of times, conversation. And it's actually a very much of an aggravating point for me. We've been through the last few years of mass distortion and distraction and annoyance. We're as a culture, as a people worldwide, we're aggravated. We don't know what's going on. We're looking for clarity. And during this time, it's been amplified by a lot of conversations we needed to have. We've started off with Me Too, Asian hate, Black Lives Matter. And now we need to be having more conversations. As you know, as you were saying, we need to converse with each other. But the downside is, as a nation, as a culture, we're pretty shit at it. We are terrible at communicating with someone else, because at the same time, we're also in a gotcha society where we don't want to say the wrong thing, so we don't say anything. I'd rather say the wrong thing to somebody and be educated by it and go, thanks for your viewpoint on that. Now I understand, rather than avoid the conversation. But my question is, how do you get people to have the conversations that they don't really want to have?
Is that a question for Emily or just in general?
In general, I purposefully, and I think that's part of my character, I will, as soon as someone starts getting uncomfortable about having a conversation, not about their opinion, your opinion is your opinion. I want to know why it's your opinion. I want to understand it. I want to relate to it. And I think you can talk to many, many different people that maybe you won't get on with, but you can understand how they came to that opinion through either their culture, their family, their upbringing, their zip code, whatever. I want to understand that part. And I think I push forward when people are uncomfortable about having a conversation. And I will say, hey, I don't want to get you uncomfortable, but I want to know. So I'm now asking that to you guys. When you have a conversation, how many times do you see people go, oh, yeah. Like I remember a friend of mine once said to me, the conversation killer is the statement, yeah, you're right. That's the back out. That's the one where everyone goes, yeah, and they piss off. They don't want to be in the conversation.
Or yeah, you're right, but.
Yeah, well, no, the but is the continuation of a conversation.
Because everything you set up to then, yeah, whatever. But
I want to
as much
have
as you
that
might,
conversation.
as much as you might want to have the conversation, is the other person going to allow you to, give your viewpoint? And at the end of the conversation, are you going to come to? Because a lot of times these conversations, I might have my views, you might have your views, and we're not going to change each other's mind. So now, are we going to be able to walk away and say, you know what, I hear you what you're saying, but I don't agree with it, but let's agree to disagree. The problem is everybody, whatever camp you're in, the conversations that we have, and if we're talking to the wrong person, nobody wants to listen to each other. I mean,
well, I also think it's a question of fragility, right? I mean, it's like, why can't, it seems as though sometimes people are so threatened by ideas that are not their own, right? That they can't even hear them, right? And I think that, I'll speak for, a country like the US, where it's like our identities, whether or not we like it, whether or not we're conscious of it, our identities are really based and formulated on, what we are not, right? Or, I guess better said, in relationship to other people's identities, right? So, what it means to be a woman is in relationship to what it means to be a man, right? And like these things are all intertwined, our identities. So when, someone's raising an idea that contradicts our own self-concept, that like immediately feels threatening, right? But I think that that's the question, and that's an entry point. It's like, okay, well, why are you threatened? Because this has been my experience and I'm talking about it, right? That shouldn't immediately be threatening, right? But when people can get in touch with that, I think that's when we're able to plant the seed. I think that's the other thing that's important to remember too, is that not politics, but when we're talking about other things, like just who we are and having different life experiences, research has shown that you can actually plant a seed, right? And then eventually, that seed can get nurtured and it can blossom into a whole plant, right? But I think that that's the starting point, is that it has to be okay for someone else to have another experience, which I have no idea about, or I think is maybe in contradiction to my belief, or what I think is true, but what is true for me. That has to be the starting point.
Emily, on
Now,
that,
one of the things
I'm loving
that I hear you, Steve, and I love the back and forth. But one of the things that I wanted to ask about what you said, Emily, is you said have a conversation, have different viewpoints, and then you excluded politics. And for me, I love to be able to have a conversation about anything in a, to kind of like what David said, we can agree to disagree, but at least we can get our views and not exclude or take anything off the table. But I love to hear from Steve.
Well, Emily was using the word threatened, and yes, I agree with a lot of people that are threatened by someone else having an idea that they didn't have. But I think also in today's society, we're frightened. We're frightened of looking stupid, and we don't want to say the wrong thing for fear of ignorance and looking daft and being ridiculed. It's stupid how many people won't do things for fear of that laughter. Can you imagine what we could achieve? I had a conversation, and again, I'll name drop. I had a conversation with Elon Musk, who literally said they'll always laugh at you just before they applaud. The great people out there don't care if you're laughing at them. They're going for a greater goal. I think today we've got a heightened sense of being threatened, but higher than that, I think we're frightened of looking stupid, and that's a shame.
Well, I would say when it comes to conversations, it's the ability to be able to look beyond your perspective and realize that there's other perspectives out there. If you can acknowledge that there's other perspectives, then it's easier to have conversations. I think that's going back to what Emily was saying, where there are people in workforces that feel trapped, they can't speak, they can't be themselves, they can't have that level of authenticity. And that's why you see so many people going out and starting their own businesses. And then to segue that over to what Krista was saying is there's stories, and when you have your own, you're able to speak your story, you're able to speak without the fear and worry about being able to have these conversations and what other people are going to think. But it really comes down to perspectives and having the empathy to understand that it goes beyond yours, to other people having perspectives, other people having experiences. And if you understand that other people's experiences shape and mold their thoughts, then it makes it easier for you to be able to understand when you have conversations. Not everybody's going to agree with what you think or what you say. It's understanding that their experiences may have gotten them to this point, but this conversation is what's going to allow them to be able to look at it in a different way.
If I could add something quick.
Yes,
That's
ma'am.
okay. All right. I wanted to add that, yeah, I it makes sense. And it's not so much that we're not worrying about what people are saying or thinking, because, I mean, we are planning and it's all about, I mean, I just actually did a video recently called "You Are Not Your Audience." So there is something to be said for looking at what your audience needs to hear from you, what you want to be sharing with them, all of that. It's more, at least from my perspective, it's more about the idea that people are going to tell stories about us, whether we like them or not, whether we want them to or not. People tell stories about my blindness, about my writing, about my business. So I might as well shape the stories that people tell, and that's how I look at it. So this blind skiing angle suddenly turns something that could be very negative and could be a crummy, boring old conversation into something more positive and more exciting. I feel like when I can do that for clients, that's when I feel really glad about what I'm doing. And when I can help them share some of those impacts, that's when I feel happy about what I do. Okay, I guess I talked a little too long. Sorry.
I didn't say anything. I'm sitting here listening to you. Don't apologize, Krista. Maybe that's a part of your story. Somebody said you talk too much. It was not Sharifah Hardie, because I was enjoying the conversation. How about you, Bill?
You know, this conversation, I think it comes down to where you spend your time and what you listen to and who you listen to. Number one, you don't need to be right, because what other people's opinions are of you or what you think, it doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is your own opinion. And once we get over that, I think it would allow us to speak freely, to speak and tell our own story, and be in our own unique voice. And on top of that, I think a lot of people are manipulated way too easily. They watch the news, they look at information on Facebook, and they don't
True.
check anything. So I think that's a big part of this conversation is if you're open, if you have an open mind to just listen, it goes back to what Steve was saying. Like, why do you think like this? It's not a but or you're right. Like Chris Voss says that all the time. When you hear you're right, you're dead in the water. So opening up your mind to just understand someone's other side, they don't need to manipulate you or make it your own thought. Just listen to them. It makes life a lot easier that way.
Absolutely.
Being here in Canada, I've been trying to hold my tongue, and I know I'm treading water with the Americans, so I'm just, there's stuff we could have the conversations, but sitting here up north, looking what's going on over there, and then now in my own backyard, what's going on. We need to. It's the same conversations that have to be. There's a group of the population that think one way, and they're stuck, and they won't listen to reason, and they only want to have conversations with their own who they have in mind. And then also here in Canada, we're going through the same thing as well. I don't know where we're headed. I really don't. It's what the pandemic has done is it's exposed us to every flaw that we have. It doesn't matter what political stripe you might have, but it's exposed everything. Businesses, the game isn't the same anymore. Everything's changed. So where are we headed if people aren't going to listen to each other?
Everything, I believe, and I always say this, change starts with the conversation. So I definitely agree with what Steve had to say. Steve, love to hear your thoughts.
No, I've always been the person that asked the question. I remember when I first started as a doorman of a nightclub, and I know you'll find that hard to believe, but I used to walk up to really wealthy people badly, but I was always asking questions. My wife has always called me a curious 5-year-old. And I would walk up to rich people and I'd be like, "Hey, how come you're rich and I'm not?" And that was a terrible, question, because when you're young, you look at rich as monetary. I want to be a millionaire, and then you get to a millionaire and you realize you're still poor.
I love the question though.
But it got me bad answers because people think of that as monetary. So I realized the hesitation. I was very quick to understand that. So my next question that I would ask rich people were, how come you're wealthy and I'm not? And it's a better question, but then you get mindset. You also get religion. I'd have people going, well, I joined this church and I married my wife and my wife supported me and I found my kids. And I'm thinking, well, I'm not going to marry your wife and join your church. That doesn't help me. And so the third adaptation of that question in Utah,
sorry, that was too easy.
Too low, yeah. But then my third adaptation of that was, how come you're successful and I'm not? And that was the home run. So I've always been the person that has constantly wanted to ask questions. And the deeper, I'm loving Emily's conversation. I'm loving her whole angle, her reason, her belief, her passion. I'm loving it when someone has an opinion. Even if and this isn't picking on Emily, even if I don't share it, I want to understand it. I want to acknowledge it. And if we're in a society where everyone's supposed to be all woke now, isn't that the whole point, that we've got to challenge cultures and understandings of the past? I don't always agree with it. Personally, the idea of the new Apple emoji of a pregnant man blows my mind.
We're going in a whole different direction.
Oh my God. It's just why. And half of the woke conversations just infuriate the crap out of me. But I still want people to ask the questions that maybe they shouldn't. Maybe they should forcibly try and get a better understanding on. So if we really are that woke to have the conversations that cause a bit of uncomfortable nature, then let's continue with it.
I love it. I love it. I love it. I say the same thing, which is why I truly love the Roundtable Talk Show. People ask me which guest infuriate me, and I always say the same thing. It's the guest.
It's Bill Bloom. Yeah, I'm with you all the time. Bill Bloom.
Have an opinion, right, wrong, or indifferent. Say something. This has been an incredible show. I truly enjoyed it. We are coming down to the last couple of seconds of the show, and what I love to do at the end of every show is just simply allow my guests the opportunity to speak directly to the audience, to everyone who is watching this show live, as well as everyone who is watching in the archives, and let them know what you want them to take away from your appearance here today. And we're going to start with you, Sean.
I would say the takeaway is there's value in your story. There's more people that can relate to your why and your journey, and it kind of ties in with this conversation of people don't know what's going on. They may think that they're dealing with it by themselves, but when you share your story, when you share your journey, you make it easier for people to realize they're not alone. And that, from a business standpoint, is your audience. And those are people that understand you. They follow you. They'll buy from you. They'll be your loyal customers. Those are things that I work on being able to tie in. So when I speak to brand clarity and target audiences and helping people be able to identify them, it's finding your why and tying it together with their why. And that's part of what I do through my one-on-one, my group courses, and group coaching sessions. So for anyone that's interested in finding out more about my 543 method to brand clarity, you can email Sean at majority.academy, and I will share the overview of it and give you an idea of what you can do to be able to gain a better understanding of it for your business and then just for yourself in life.
I love it. I love it. Thank you, Sean. Speaking of stories, Krista, what would you like people to take away?
Love that, Sean. And I'm going to add that if you feel something's impossible, go and find someone who's already done it And when it comes to telling your story, maybe you need to find a mentor like I did. Maybe you need to hire a writer like my clients do. Maybe you need to create something, do something in your life that might turn into a story. Very often we have done lots of things in our lives, but we don't even realize they're stories until someone else comes in and says, wow, that's amazing. Wow, that's inspiring. I didn't think I was inspiring until other people told me so. Love it or not, people are going to tell stories about us, so we might as well tell our own stories.
I love it.
Wise Words That Matter on Facebook Live every Wednesday. That's also my website, wisewordsThatMatter.com, and where you can subscribe to my email list if you want to find out about the 7 budget eating, marketing, and PR mistakes to avoid. Thanks so much, Sharifah.
Thank you, Krista. I appreciate you, Bill.
So my big takeaway from today is everyone had incredible stories to share, really incredible. And when you stop and listen, that's your best asset. Right now, I think if you go out and live the life that you want to, start by doing something small. You're not going to get there by tomorrow, a year from now, 5 years from now. Figure out who you want to become and take small steps to get there. And have fun with it. Speak your mind. Tell the person who's in your life what you think. And just really go out and have fun with your life. Don't take things too seriously, because at the end of the day, we're not going to get out of it alive, right? So go out and have fun. Enjoy your life.
Thank you, Bill. We got to ask David about that. David, are we getting out of this alive?
Exactly.
Absolutely. You know how you'll get out of the life? Because you're going to plan properly by getting my book, Executor Help. But the other thing is, in all seriousness, the reason why, since the pandemic, it's forced us all to think a little bit, maybe not consciously to the forefront, but to have the conversations about end of life situations, estate planning. And, that's why the book has become so popular. And I think the reason why I wrote the book, and I want people to walk away from it is that you've prepared your family. You want to leave a legacy, not a legacy and a mess. So you want to make sure that you have the conversations that you need to have. You need to make sure that you've created a will, you've prepared your executor, you've prepared your family for those unexpected emergencies. And basically, you can find out more by just going to my website, davidedie.com. I appreciate being on this panel today. It's been a lot of fun. Steve seems a bit, whatever, and what am I going to do? And so I appreciate being here. Thank you, Sharifah.
Thank you, David.
Go to davidedie.com.
Thank you. I missed all of that, but we're going to go over to Emily to see what Emily's final words are for us.
Thank you, Sharifah, and thank you to all of you. My final words are to women of color. Listen, ladies, you have more options than to suffer through a toxic working environment. The stress is not normal, right? Like the unmanageable workloads, it's not normal, even if no one around you is saying so, right? So just know that, speak up about what you're experiencing, right? Like that makes your workplace better and that creates protection for you. If you want support with that, reach out to me at emily@forwardeverglobal.com. And then also for, as a takeaway from the conversation, let's also apply that notion of failure, right? Not only to like profession or like entrepreneurship, but also to these conversations that actually help us connect with other people and better understand the world that we live in, right?
Yes. Thank you, Emily. Appreciate you. Steve.
Well, I think we should just stop being scared to have the conversation. I think the whole point about this, whether it be storytelling, even just the fact that we're having this round table, we need to have way more conversations. In fact, there's 2 things that have to be done. 1, we need to be having more conversations. And 2, everyone needs to be buying this book, The Art of Making Things Happen. Best book since Harry Potter. But there you go. Basically, have more conversations.
Thank you, Steve. I want to thank you all for being guests on today's episode of the Roundtable Talk Show. And I especially want to thank everyone who tuned in to watch the show live, as well as everyone who's watching in the archives. I definitely appreciate your support. I appreciate you watching. I appreciate you sharing. But please support our guests. Our guests are here this morning to share their stories, so please support them. Pick up a copy of their book, visit their websites, follow them on social media, reach out to them. And when you do, please let them know Sharifah Hardie says hi. Now, if you need assistance with your business, or maybe you want to be a guest on the Roundtable Talk Show, please visit my website at AskSharifah.com. Until tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. Pacific, everyone have a safe and a blessed day.